and Mr. Elson Lowe, Treasurer of the People's National Congress Reform and Economy. Welcome. Today's press statement will be read by the Leader of the Opposition.
The PPP must desist from seeking to dominate and control the National Two-Shell Council. President Irfan Ali's recent engagement with the Two-Shell Council is a clear indication that the government has no interest in the genuine development of indigenous communities. In fact, their actions are a manifestation of a government that is committed to dominating and controlling the lives of people in indigenous communities. The government failed to address the key concerns of the indigenous people. Foremost among them, the right to manage their organization independently, the need for free, prior, and informed consent, and their desire to have sustainable communities. In the case of Region 9, the government has failed to identify measures to deal with the twin problems of drought and flooding. We in the PNCRA-PNU are committed to continue the development of reservoirs to save water during the rainy season and to develop a proper program of drainage and irrigation to help the farmers and people of Region 9. Our people-centered development strategy will focus on consultation with indigenous communities with the aim of ensuring the development of sustainable indigenous communities. Residents complained of terrible living conditions in La Parfaite Harmony. In a recent visit to Westminster on the Naming and Dairy in La Parfaite Harmony by leader of the PNCR, chairman of APNU, and leader of the opposition, and other activists, residents complain that there are a number of problems facing the community that the PPP government shows no interest in addressing. The residents contend that there are high incidents of crime to their communities, robberies, and that the police are never visible. They also said that the many empty lots with high bushes have now become havens for criminals to lay wait and rob them. They also lamented the terrible condition of the roads in their communities. They noted as well the shabby work that is being done in the area by government contractors. Even with the many empty lots, squatters in the area are complaining that they are having grave difficulties obtaining a house lot. The residents of Bamboo Dam squatting area lamented the fact that they live in squalor with little or no attention from the Ministry of Housing. Residents also complain that the streets are terrible and the water is not fit for drinking. The PPP must desist. Gotta go. The PPP's attitude prevents any possibility for the crafting of a joint 15-year development plan for Guyana. We note the call by the AFC for the political parties in Guyana to craft a 15-year development plan for the country. Let us first state that we in the PNCR/APNU deem such a call to be well-intentioned. We appreciate the rationale behind the proposal. That is, the need for continuity from one government to the next. However, we believe that we differ so fundamentally on national priorities, developmental strategy, leadership styles, moral duties and values, and political principles that such collaboration is highly improbable at this stage because the PPP is focused on ensuring their families, friends, and favorites become rich at the expense of the people, with the use of corruption as the favorite means of accumulating wealth. On the issue of national development strategy and priorities, we believe in putting people first and at the center of our agenda, both as a moral obligation to guarantee their well-being and as a social and economic investment in the people of Guyana. The PPP, as we know, is hell-bent on spending the bulk of the country's revenue on infrastructure projects in the false hope or wishful thinking that this expenditure will trickle down to the masses. It has not, and it will not. It has mostly moved upwards to their cronies and party leaders. Furthermore, our focus on people extend to respect and enhancing their rights, dignity, securities, and aspiration. In this regard, the PPP attitude and approach point in the opposite direction. How can we, for example, ever agree that teachers and public servants deserve substantial salary increases? Secondly, as part of the next government, we in the PNCR/APNU will wage war on corruption and financial waste in government spending. On the contrary, the PPP is naturally comfortable to facilitate or condone tens of billions of dollars diverting into the bank accounts of friends, families, and favorites. Our contrasting approach on this aspect alone is enough to doom any collaboration on writing a development strategy. Thirdly, we see the need to embed the principles of good governance in Guyana's national political milieu. We see no evidence that the PPP will embrace or support such endeavors to promote the rule of law, transparency, accountability, responsiveness, inclusion and participation, equity, and basic human rights. Fourthly, we differ fundamentally from the PPP in the management of our oil resources. For us, full liability coverage for oil spills is a must. A petroleum commission is a must. Full and effective audits are a must. Closure of financial loopholes and leakages in oil revenue is a must. Increasing our share of this pie is a must. And ensuring Guyanese benefit fully from oil resource is a must. The PPP shares none of these convictions. In fact, it steadfastly opposes them, such as its resistance against setting up a petroleum commission and full liability coverage in the case of an oil spill. Lastly, joint economic planning must be based on a solid political consensus or shared political understanding. The PPP's inborn obsession with total political control and domination makes such a consensus impossible. We intend to move forward in an inclusive system of government. For these and other reasons, therefore, we do not see the possibility of a joint economic development plan in the current political landscape. The record will show that we are open to joint efforts when they are likely to succeed, as in the defense of Guyana territorial integrity. On the question of continuity, let us point out that many of the projects under the current government were conceptualized under the coalition government or the Burnham PNC. We therefore do not see ourselves stopping or reversing them, but instead rescuing and streamlining them. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I will take questions on the press statement. Ms. Davina. Ms. Davina, you're breaking up.
You just said that increasing Ghana's share of the pie from its oil resources. Hello?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Hello?
You can go ahead. We're hearing you much better now.
Okay. Mr. Norton, you were just saying that increasing Guyana's share of the pie from its oil wells is a must for your party. But can you say what specific areas you would utilize to ensure this happens? I recall that you mentioned audits previously, but what other areas would you utilize in that PDA
We have said
to ensure Guyana benefits more?
We have said Article 232(1) of the PSA provides a wide range of opportunities for us to engage ExxonMobil and increase the benefits for the people of Guyana. And we continue to be committed to that because the particular article is clear and provides avenue for us to engage Exxon and increase the benefits to the people of Guyana.
Right, but I'm asking you what specific areas you would utilize to seek more benefits for Guyana. Like some of it calling for taxes, some of it calling for more royalties. What would you do? How would you ensure a greater share of the pie?
Like I said, no area is a sacred cow. We will engage on every aspect of the contract with the aim of bringing benefits to Guyana. Now, it might be X and Y, but as the time progresses, there might be more added, sometimes some change. But in essence, that article permits us to look at every aspect of the agreement and to improve the benefits to the people of Guyana.
Thank you very much, sir. Ms. Haynes, as I have the floor, I have two other questions, but they're off Mr. Norton's press statement. Should I go ahead or wait until you do the floor?
I'll come back to you on it because I do have other persons waiting to ask questions on the press statement.
No problem.
All right. Mr. Adam Harris, then followed by Mr. Shabal.
Good morning, all.
Good morning.
Currently, you're talking about what you plan to do as far as the oil resources are concerned. These oil resources are coming into the country as it stands. And the government keeps going to the natural resource fund for drawdowns as soon as some money gets into the system. How do you propose to check how all this money is being spent? I don't see where it's going.
I do not think that without state power you can check it. In the parliament, we oppose the legislation that give them this right to take nearly 100% of the income. The government, having a one-seat majority, went ahead and approved it. One has to work assiduously to change the government, or at minimum ensure that they are a minority government so that they cannot use a simple majority to deal with matters that are critical to the development of Guyana. One has to recognize that our system does not have the checks and balances of the US system. It's a brand or a variant of the Westminster in which a simple majority can do a lot of things, even if it's against the interests of the people. So we have got to continue to expose it. We have got to work assiduously to obtain political power so that we can govern Guyana in the interest of the people of Guyana. But to believe, like I see some people write online, that there are some mechanisms in the parliamentary system to bring checks and balances, the answer is no.
Follow up?
Go ahead.
But, all right, yeah. Now, you say that the parliamentary system, you can't control it unless you make the PPP a minority government. The PPP
Or not the government.
Or not the government, sorry. The PPP was a minority government, and they continued as though they weren't government. Decisions negated by Parliament went to them. And there were moves to charge them. Nothing happened. So why do you think this time around, even if they're a minority government, they'll be any different?
Because with a minority government, you can vote them down in Parliament so they don't become resolutions of the Parliament. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you would be in a much better position in terms of parliamentary power. Now, as it relates to charging them. I'm of the view that the court system gives a lot of wiggle room. So unless you can revamp that, take for instance the question of charging them for corruption. We saw when the APN UAFC was in government, charges were brought against them. Of course, they used the legal system to delay, one. Two, what they did as well was to use the argument that the politicians weren't public officers, so malfeasance in public office did not apply to them. That also would need to change. But also, I think recently we have had a ruling by the Chief Justice which suggests that there's a change in direction and therefore they can be charged and dealt with, because that ruling suggests that once they are serving the public as government ministers, etc., then they are public officers. And so there seems to be more scope for them to be dealt with in the present or the new dispensation.
But Adam, one of the things that we would want to stress is that while, of course, we can look at what's going on and look at what's gone on in the past, we have repeatedly said that we will ensure when in office that Guyana's institutions are strengthened, that you see a petroleum commission, that you see an appropriately staffed GRA, that you see really the measures that are needed to govern this country be put in place. And of course, we want to ensure that Guyanese really are able to benefit from that kind of governance and to change the norms in the country so that PPP cannot think ever that this is acceptable. We believe in a different style of governance, and so our approach is going to be one which promotes transparency and accountability. We've even spoken recently about the need for the national reserves to be published in a regular fashion, and the need if the need for there to be criminal penalties for hiding that, given the serious risk that it poses to our nation. When you look at what happened with the audits, it required tremendous effort from us, from the media, from civil society, to get those audits, first of all, to get the second audit to be done, and then to get the other audits released. We will change the way that governance happens in this country for the better, and that really is where the focus, I think, needs to be.
Thank you. Mr. Dennis Chabot.
Mr. Norton, Dennis Chabot, Democratic. Mr. Norton, currently the opposition continues to argue that the People's Progressive Party doesn't have constitution in the APLs.
People's Party, what?
Are you hearing?
No, I didn't get you clearly at all.
Okay. Dennis Chabot, Democratic.
No, I heard that.
Currently, the opposition argues that the People's Progressive Party administration continues to exclude about 50% of the population in its decision making. And today you're telling us that you are in favor of inclusivity, but you cannot engage the PPP in the development of a 50-year plan. How do you intend to do so while at the same time being inclusive? How do you intend to craft the development plan on the basis of inclusivity while at the same time excluding the PPP, which will represent today probably the opposition in the next election, probably 50% of the population? Aren't you contradicting yourself?
No, I want to read for you what we said. Lastly, joint economic planning must be based on a solid political consensus or shared political understanding. What we are suggesting here is that you can, even though that is the reality, you can engage the People's Progressive Party at some stage to get political consensus. What we're saying at present, they are showing no interest in political consensus. They're showing interest in domination and control. And therefore, in the present environment, it is extremely difficult to achieve the objective. But we haven't ruled out, like it is stated here, the need for joint planning but understanding that a prerequisite for joint planning is a solid political consensus or shared political understandings. For instance, I believe that before you arrive at a development plan, there are some basic things that we need to agree to. You're going over the river. I went to Parfait Harmony. The PPP uses its colors on every roundabout. Now, I believe when the APU was in government, we also overdid it with green in some areas. We need to find consensus as to how we remove partisanship from national projects. That to me is critical. Something as simple as the color of state buildings might appear simple to you, but for us to have a consensus so that we don't politicize it even by the color, all of those areas we will have to address. The point I'm making is that in the extant political situation where the government is bent on corruption, where the government sees its focus on infrastructure, where the government sees its interest in ensuring its elite, its family, friends, and favorites are getting richer and richer, we differ fundamentally from them because we want a people-centered approach in which we put the interests of the people of Guyana first. And therefore, at this stage, we have basically two diametrically opposed positions. But however, by that statement, we haven't ruled out moving forward, we find political consensus and create the conditions for a joint development plan.
Dennis, I just want to add to that. I couldn't agree with the leader more in that regard. But one of the things that we really must look at in this country is we've got a garden variety, a typical kleptocracy on our hands. And in kleptocracies, the purpose of government programs, the purpose of projects is to steal. It's not to improve the lives of the people in the country. And so that's why you're seeing all manner of bizarre projects when it comes to infrastructure, where they're redoing roads that are perfectly fine and then coming back and doing the same roads over and over, as you saw with the Thomas Lands Road, which I believe has been being redone for the 5th time in only a couple of years. And so for us to come together from that perspective, we have to first of all agree as to what is the purpose of governance in this country. And we believe that the purpose of governance is to improve the lives of Guyanese. Now, if the PPP's believe the purpose of governance is to enrich themselves, then obviously that is something that we're not going to accept. And so we need to see a change in the attitude of the PPP. They need to move away from being a typical kleptocracy. And that, I think, will serve Guyana well.
Follow-up, please. If there is a minority government, would you be disposed to engaging the PPP in the creation of a national long-term development plan or strategy for the country?
If there is a minority government, you still have got to create the political consensus. And I believe the first task really is to establish some amount of political consensus before you can talk about a development plan. Let us not forget, we put together a multi-agency, multidisciplinary team that did a development strategy for this country. And the government, the PPP government, put it in cold storage because they didn't agree a lot with it and many elements of its philosophical underpinning. So it's not that like if we don't have the experience, we have the experience. We have had the experience of that group putting together a very comprehensive plan, only to see the PPP not sharing the philosophical underpinnings of it and put it in cold storage and nothing happened. We are all for a national development plan. We are all for it being based on political consensus rather than a futile engagement that brings nothing. And that's all we're saying. You have to narrow the political gap, find consensus before you can talk about development, let's assume we begin to talk about a development plan. And the PPP wants to make it 60% infrastructure. That wouldn't find favor with us because we know we want to reduce poverty. We want to reduce the cost of living. We want to see our workers get better wages and salaries. The PPP doesn't want that. In fact, the recommendation of 10% for the teachers is a clear indication that for them, they do not have an interest in giving people a livable income. We have agreed that we will give a livable income. And what they do is turn around and to politically seek to blame the General Secretary of the GTU, who we support, who is a member of parliament. We believe that you have to improve the lives of the people. You can come with whatever package you want. If the people don't have the basic income to live, then the people are in deep trouble, and we don't want them there. We want them with a livable income. We want to see the people of Guyana benefiting significantly with a lower cost of living and the kind of framework that facilitates their development and the reduction of poverty. With all these measures the PPP are talking about over the last 4 years, poverty continues to increase. Malnutrition continues to increase. The performance in the education system is going down. In other words, there are investments that are not redundant to the benefit of the people of Guyana and to Guyana generally.
Mr. Norton, Madam Chair, if you allow me 2 quick follow-ups. Mr. Norton, why should Guyanese believe you in terms of providing teachers and government that employs a livable wage? And were you to get into office to respond to macroeconomic fundamentals such as inflation and ensuring that that the economy does not get into a period of instability if you were to deliver big wage increases? And secondly, what does this article in the agreement for ExxonMobil you're pointing to that will allow you to deliver more out of that agreement?
If I can send and get it, I can read it for you. But I said it, I recall it's Article 2.1. Now, as it relates to why they should believe us, we have been establishing the inflation argument by the government can never be a viable argument. The amount of money you're putting in the hand of a few contractors can fuel more inflation. 666 billion, I think, is what is identified for inflation. The money you will pay workers will meet nowhere close to that. Additionally, we have always said it's not just solely a case of paying money, but that we will expand agriculture into all regions, which will create employment. We have identified projects to increase employment, put people in business, and once there are the economic activities to absorb the resources, there wouldn't be inflation. And it has been shown, if you go back to the Armstrong Award, where significant increases were given, there wasn't an increase in inflation. If you go back to when the APNU raised the salaries 70%, there was no inflation or significant inflation. And so to argue like Jack Deo does, and you know I've always argued he's not an economist, he's a political jagabat. If he argues on pure economic terms, he will see that paying workers a livable wage will not result in inflation. This inflationary argument raised by the PPP is one to suppress the wages of workers while allowing their cronies to benefit from the 166 billion, thus increasing the wealth, accentuating the poverty, and the government believes by doing that, it will exercise control over the people. What they miss is that it also simultaneously brings resentment and created the crisis that the government has found itself in.
I see the hand of Mr. Adam Harris.
Yes. Now, Mr. Norton, you've been talking about inclusivity and, getting all these things together. From the start of this government, President Ifeanyi said, y'all want to talk to them people who want these elections. And every step of the way, there has been a move to avoid any dealings with the opposition. What makes you think the tiger will change its stripe?
Well, I do not necessarily believe the tiger will change its stripe. But once you're in government, you're obligated to govern in the interests of all the people of Guyana. And to the extent that the PPP is a representative of a section of the Guyanese society, then you should meet out to them and engage them. However, I am not naive to believe that that will change in a week. And it can be only a top-down process. There also has to be a bottom-up process where before the elections and even after the elections, we engage PPP strongholds, which we have been doing, and seeking to bring an understanding of the difference between us and our approach and the PPP and its approach. Now, I am not naive to believe anybody changes overnight, but that doesn't mean that you are not obligated as a political party and a government to work towards the change that you see necessary. The PPP is divisive by nature, but the world is a funny place. The dynamics of today can change by tomorrow. And so, in a very optimistic fashion, I would prefer us to proceed and, when the time comes, look at the measures to ensure that we can work and achieve our objectives. Let us not forget that under the APNU, they were involved even in oil, issues of oil and gas. Let us understand that in the security realm, also in the question of the Ghana territorial controversy, they were involved and engaged. And so we have had a record of showing that we can move in the direction of inclusivity. And if the PPP rejects it at the time, then the people will know and the people will react. We are not opposed to engaging the PPP. What we are not prepared to do is to give them the optical activities they like, photo ops, and they are not followed by genuine change to ensure the development of the people of Guyana. Our approach will be different.
Thank you. At this time, I'll open the floor for any other questions. Ms. Davina.
Hi, thank you. First, Mr. Norton, can you say what is the PNCR's position on the massive returns being earned by Exxon on its equity contributions to the Stabber block?
I didn't hear that.
Massive return.
Would you want me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
I was asking what is the PNCR's position on the massive returns being earned by Exxon on its equity contributions to the Stabber block. Mr. Jack Deotis press conference said last week that they are earning massive returns on their equity. So if you can just say what is your party's position on that. And finally, for me, sir, the AFC said it will be releasing its policy on oil and gas soon. Can you say when we can expect a similar framework from the PNCR?
Now, let me start with the last one. We have consistently outlined our policy positions on oil and gas. And so it is not for the lack of a policy. What you are seeking is one document. We will, like I've said before, we have put many policy positions. We will have a clear oil and gas policy document for the electorate as we move towards the elections. But most of it are already out there because we have identified them. Now, as a country, we invited Exxon to invest. We expect them to have returns on their investment. What we don't want is the disproportionate returns. And in that regard, like we said, we will use that article in the PSA to make the changes to ensure that the people of Guyana benefit and that there is a reduction of the asymmetry involved in the PSA.
Are you concerned about what that rate of return might be? Because I recall that your party had issued a statement before, and they were asking for there to be clarity on what that specific rate of return is on the company's investments.
Well, you have answered it. We have asked for it. We need the details, like I've said before, but our general policy position has not changed. That we need to make changes to ensure that we benefit more, and every area of the contract should be dealt with to ensure that the people of Guyana benefit significantly, while ExxonMobil gets reasonable returns on its investment.
Thank you.
One of the things we also want to make sure that we note here, Divina, is that we will seek appropriate expertise when in office to deal with this issue. We've already said that we will engage the operator. We've already said that we will bring in that expertise and that we will look closely at the existing arrangements and that we will look at the entire sector as a whole. The reason that is vital is because, you know, when you mentioned that the vice president says that there's massive returns, or I think that's what you were saying. You know, up until a couple of weeks ago, the vice president didn't seem to know that there was interest that was being paid on the FPSOs. So really, we're not going to rely on the vague statements of Vice President Jagdeo and the absence of a policy position that the PAP has. We're going to conduct our own assessments and we're going to engage the operator appropriately. And as a result, we'll see the best going forward for the country, the best of all worlds.
I also want to add, we have said continuously, even before the AFC, that we will bring the expertise. But I want to clarify something. We don't only see bringing the expertise to help. We also see training and development of local expertise so that we gradually reduce the dependency on foreign experts and improve our own capacity to manage the oil and gas sector. So bringing the experts is really a short-term solution, while at the same time preparing for the medium and the long term to have a plethora of Guyanese experts that can help us in this regard. You would have seen the enormous benefit that comes from having the expertise of Vincent Adams. There are other experts, Guyanese. So I want to make it clear, one, in the first instance, where there are Guyanese experts, we will utilize them. We will utilize other international experts, but from a policy standpoint, it has to be within the context of developing local expertise so that in the final analysis, the independence of Guyana is secured.
Just a brief follow-up, please, quickly. Mr. Norton, what would you say is a feasible rate of return on the company's investments? What would you say is an acceptable percentage?
You know, I do not like speculating. For me to do that, I have got to have the data at my disposal. And then once we can look at all the data, how much they would have invested, how much are the likely returns, then we have to look at depreciation over the years. Then you have the whole question of decommissioning. All of those variables will have to be factored in. We'll have to develop an economic model that allows us to put all those factors in and then arrive at what is reasonable. But for me to just say that, to me, that would be zombie economics.
Miss Renee.
Mr.
Go ahead. One second, Mr. Chabal.
Good morning, everyone. Renee from Trade Union. Mr. Norton, do you agree with Minister Barrett's line as well as that he's one of the best minds during the world? And can you give your reason for your answer?
We didn't hear your question.
Yes, I did. You're talking about the minister saying that is the best managed oil sector in the world. It's garbage. Let me tell you why it is garbage. If you have the best managed oil sector and you don't have the capacity to do proper audits, you haven't even put the mechanisms in place. You have the question of being able to monitor how much Exxon exports, etc. None of those things are in place. You don't have an independent petroleum commission that brings expert knowledge to the decision making. What you have is Barra Jackdale, who lives in some fairy tale world that he has intellectual capacity vis-a-vis oil, making pronouncements, retracting them, then coming with another set. The absence of a clear policy direction for oil and gas, the fact that there was no feasibility study for the Wales project, all of those are indicative of the fact that the sector is improperly managed. And then when you had the issue of the audit and reducing the amount, I think 14 million, here is 240 million, sorry. Here is the minister saying it is the technicians. How is it that you are managing this sector and a few technicians can make decisions that are significant and impacting on the Guyanese people, and you don't know, and then fighting to sanction them? That is a clear indication that you have mismanaged the sector. How is it up until now you do not have exact figures on the discoveries and how much they constitute? All of those are information that you need to claim to be managing the sector in a proper way. And even with the local content element of it, there are problems to be resolved that the government is not paying any attention to. So I won't worry with Barrett. He was probably affected by them allegedly holding him in the United States. And so his responses might be a function of the confusion that emanated from his skirmishes with the law in the US.
One thing we would also like to stress is this has got to be one of the worst managed oil sectors in the entire world. You may recall that we had an oil block auction, which many have regarded as a failure. And that oil block auction was as a result of the PUPs putting in place different criteria, changing or using a different PSA, which many were uncomfortable with, changing the Petroleum Act. And so well, that to me is a pretty good indication of that the PUP has done things, but the things have not been good things. What we've observed really in the past few years is that the PUP has created crises where there did not need to be a crisis. Did we need to have a crisis over, as Lita just mentioned, audits? Did we need to have a crisis regarding the issue of oil spill insurance and a parent company guarantee? These are all manufactured crises which have come from extreme incompetence and a kleptocratic government. And so what you're seeing again is a typical kleptocratic government where power is concentrated, decisions are poor, and the industry is held back. Even the vice president had said, we're not going to have seismic studies done because it will set the sector back. We don't have time to do that. And now, after the failed auction, they have to go and do exactly those seismic studies. That has, of course, set the industry back by several years. So to me, it's very clear that this is one of the worst managed sectors. As soon as the PUP got its hand on an oil block auction, what happened? They bungled it. And so really that has been the what we've seen across the board when it comes to the governance of the sector.
Thank you. Mr. Chabral?
Can I go ahead?
Yeah.
Mr. Norton, how important is the indigenous American segment of the population to your party or a coalition of opposition parties, either winning the elections or securing a minority government?
I would start by saying this. I don't think we should put the Amerindian or the indigenous people question solely in the context of winning an election. What we have to recognize is that the indigenous people of Guyana are part of Guyana, and that we need to develop policies and programs to benefit the indigenous community. We need to adumbrate clear policies, programs, and projects to ensure that we can develop sustainable indigenous communities. Now, like any other ethnic group in the society, the indigenous people constitute a percentage of the Guyana population. And if every Guyanese matters, then it shouldn't be restricted to what amount of them you need to win the election. It should be a question of us articulating clear policies that are embraced by the indigenous community, and based on those policies, the indigenous community vote for us. We will outline those policies, we will outline our programs, and we will encourage the indigenous community to continue to vote for us. Many of them did, and we want to increase it, and that will be our approach. We are against treating the indigenous people as just a tool for election. Everything we do is aimed at how much votes you will get. Like I said in the press statement, when we visited the Rupununi, the major complaint was when there is heavy rainfall, there is flooding. When the rainfall is over, drought comes, and their agriculture is in trouble. We began while we were in government to develop reservoirs so that water can be held, and when the dry season come, apart from the wells, etc., you have access, because one of the problems you had is that you would have dug wells, but in the dry season, some of those wells don't have enough water or no water. So there is need for a comprehensive approach to dealing with the problems in Region 9 and in other regions, so that we can ensure the people of those areas have the services they need. For instance, I pointed out when I came from the Rupununi that it was appalling that there were no adequate or inadequate sanitation for people in those areas. I recall pointing out that one of the things we will do in government is have a national sanitation program specifically aimed at the indigenous people, where we can improve the toileting facilities so that they can have flush toilets, etc., and remove from the society, not only in the Rupununi, but across this country, the need for the use of pit latrines. It is unacceptable without oil, much less with oil. And so our approach to the indigenous community has to be different. We believe that the Tushals should be given the freedom to govern their communities and be allowed the independence that will allow the involvement of their people and proper decision making. So I wouldn't want to get into any details. What we do know is that a proper victory is dependent on winning in indigenous communities, and we'll strive to ensure we win the support of indigenous communities.
Follow up with that, Mr. Norton, at the National Tushals Conference, which is on which began yesterday, both yesterday and today, Dr. Ali and Mr. Jagdeo made comparisons between their record and yours as far as serving the indigenous peoples. To what extent do you believe that those comparisons and, of course, the provision of more access to resources, financial or otherwise, will in fact result in a likely reduction or elimination of voter support at the next elections?
Sometimes idiocy transcends the normal. And when idiocy transcends the normal, you don't want to run down that road. Look, the first government to give land titles to indigenous people was the People's National Congress. You can't remove that. In 1968, I think it was done. And some of it was done under the last government. The only government in this country that had a policy called hinterland development, when the Amerindians were predominant in the hinterland. Until now, I remember vivid pictures of Forbes Burnham cutting down a tree, opening access to the hinterland. It is the PNC that made access to the hinterland by road a possibility without oil resources. They talk about ministers being appointed. It was the PNC that appointed the first indigenous minister. Did we have a proper hinterland development scholarship program? Yes. Many indigenous people today can boast that they had that kind of access. Who expanded secondary schools to indigenous communities? The People's National Congress reform. Who began the process of ensuring the engagement of the indigenous communities in national life? The People's National Congress reform. Barra Jack Deo is just a pathological liar who would lie about everything and pay no attention to the fact that he is lying. When lying becomes part of your life and a kind of a phenomenon sui generis, you can't help yourself. And so he cannot help himself. Irfan Ali, as the puppet in line, is following suit. But if you go and look seriously, you will see the basis for indigenous involvement and improvement in this society predated the People's Progressive Party in government. So I wouldn't waste time with the nonsense being said by Barra Jack Deo and his tailcoat politician, Irfan Ali.
Right. I understand what you said there, Mr. Norton, but I thought to ask you, to what extent do you believe that the provision of more resources and other benefits to the indigenous communities, as has been outlined in the National Social Conference, will result in a reduction in the number of votes from the indigenous community at the next elections?
In fact, I believe that the PPP's approach will increase our votes. And I'll tell you why it will increase our votes. First of all, they're dominating the two shows, and the two shows are resisting domination. When you dominate people and they resist, they're going to come out and tell you, no, I ain't going to vote for you, but they're going to end up not voting for you. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is this. The programs they are outlining are not empowering the indigenous people in the sense of making them independent. For instance, there is no program that they would have outlined that will change the situation in which when a contract is given in indigenous community, in large measure, it goes to PPP people. In our approach, we will have training for indigenous people to have the technical skills to do the work. We will also train them in financial literacy and small business management and help them to become contractors. The PPP cannot afford that. To do that is to cut out part of the 666 million corruption money they enjoy. And so we believe that as we speak to the indigenous people, they are understanding. Let me remind you, it is the APNU AFC that put a wide expanse of internet hubs in indigenous communities, not the PPP. In fact, they have closed down some because they don't want people to access information. But the point about that access is that they are hearing what is happening, they are understanding what is happening. And when you go to those communities, you're seeing a willingness to engage and a desire to change the PPP and get rid of them from government. I believe across the country, people are beginning to believe or already believe that if Guyana is to grow, the PPP must go.
Dennis, one of the things we also really want to highlight is that the PPP just is missing the point entirely. It has been shown through various, I believe, World Bank studies that unfortunately in our urban communities, you have the highest rates of poverty in the country, highest rates of malnutrition. And our policies, which are intended to target the elimination of poverty, elimination of malnutrition, will benefit people in indigenous communities at some of the highest rates. So we will be able to, in short order, really cut poverty in this country and move people's lives forward. The PPP is putting band-aids here and there without dealing with the major issues. I would also say that one of the reasons that you see such frustration in the hinterland communities is that inflation has been at the highest in those hinterland communities because of additional transportation costs. The PPP has done virtually nothing to deal properly with inflation. In fact, their inflation rates are very questionable, and they have consistently put minuscule numbers towards inflation, dealing with the cost of living crisis directly. Again, this year, not even 1% of the national budget. Now, of course, if you're in a community where the cost of goods is very high, where there are shortages and so on, as many hinterland communities experience, you will be feeling that squeeze. And so a little band-aid here and there is not going to be effective. In fact, it demonstrates what people have come to believe already, which is that the PPP does not genuinely care about their well-being and is perfectly happy to let them continue to be face this biting cost of living crisis.
I also wanted to say that we will also have Marvin Williams deal with the issue. Unfortunately, he had a prior engagement, and so we generally prefer our indigenous people to deal with those issues, and Marvin has been in the forefront of it. And we will ensure that Marvin does a comprehensive response to this facade that the PPP got going on.
I have a question that was sent to me because Mr. Jarrell from Guyana Times is unable to use his mic, and his question to the leader of the opposition is, what is his comment on the government's decision to increase the indigenous shares of the carbon credit sale from 15% to 26%?
Again, it's the manifestation of the arbitrary nature of the PPP. They should have consulted with the indigenous communities, which they didn't. And most of the indigenous communities are calling for 50% and above.
Thank you. Mr. Adam Harris.
Yeah, Comrade Leader, I want to look at the Public Procurement Commission. Your party has no representative on that commission. But yet we notice a lot of things seeming to go haywire, the award of contracts and all of that. What has been the report from your reps on that commission? Or are they still actively involved in the commission?
They are actively involved and they are questioning things, but don't forget that not everything goes to the Procurement Commission. And a lot of times it is people who complain that will lead to a Procurement Commission investigation. And the government's approach to the Procurement Commission is to suffocate it and not allow it to do its job. So even though there are questions raised, there are issues being raised, remember, this has to be dealt with at a number of levels. You got the ministerial level, you have the regional level, you have a number of levels in which there is the allocation of contracts. And that is done arbitrarily and by the whole wanton amount of them. And there's another problem. A lot of people are punishing and they might believe they're entitled to 3 contracts. And they come to you and say, yes, we're entitled to 3, but we only get 1. And then when you say let our people raise it at the Procurement Commission, they say, no, they're going to stop me from getting the little bit that we have. Remember that this government has instilled a culture of fear. And a lot of people are just waiting to change the government. They believe that to tackle the government at this stage, and I can give you another practical example. The PNU AFC legally allocated buildings and lands to people when we were in government. The PPP come and wanting to take them away, apart from the woman who decide the best way to solve it is to become PPP. Many of the persons, some of the persons went to court, but many of them who are dependent on government contracts do not want a confrontation. They prefer to wait quiet and then react to the ballot box to change the government. We have to understand the peculiar situation in which we find ourselves. Under the APNU, you would have seen Mrs. Corbyn leading a number of reviews and making pronouncements. The Procurement Commission doesn't operate in the way it should in keeping with the law. It has become in large measure, apart from the 2 opposition reps, a PPP tool to be used. That's the reality. And should I say, both reps on that commission have been proactive, but the young woman has been extremely proactive, raising the concerns, dealing with the issues, but sometimes to no avail.
Mr. Norton, did you discourage your supporters and leaders from attending the AFC meeting?
No, I don't have to. Why would I? I have made it clear that the AFC was part of the coalition. We still have a good relationship with them. And I don't have to discourage anybody from going. But do not forget that people are involved in politics and they will do their own assessment and arrive at what they should do and what they shouldn't do. I don't know of anyone who discouraged our members and supporters. Our members and supporters are politically conscious and know what they should support and what they shouldn't support. I don't think anybody instructed them or have to instruct them as it relates to understanding the politics of Guyana and doing what they think is best.
But in a public good relationship, why did you encourage them to go?
Well, first of all, the AFC didn't advise us that they were holding a meeting in Linden. In fact, like everybody else, I saw it on I think the day before or 2 days before in social media. And I would assume that if you are a political party and you consider us to be ally and you're holding a political activity and you want our support, you will engage us to say, look, we're having this activity, let us work out support, etc. So I do not know that I had to encourage our supporters to participate in something that we weren't invited to, and a suggestion be made that we play a role.
A quick clarification, Mr. Norton, tangentially, has the PNC been having any discussions with either the WTA or the AFC with respect to coalition for the next elections?
We have been having with the WPA. The last position I know that we had with the AFC was that we will continue to operate as a parliamentary opposition, APNU AFC, but that the AFC wants to do its political work for now by itself, and at the right time we will look at coalition politics.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, if there is any final question, I'll take that before we close off. All right. With there being no other questions, I want to thank our media personnel for joining today's press conference. And of course, our viewers on our social media platform. We do hope that you have a wonderful afternoon.